So we're going to be making our vehicle, or it doesn't have to be a vehicle. It could be a character or whatever that's doing the actual racing. And this is going to introduce a new topic, which is really one of two big topics that I want to do for this project. That's a big deal. One of them is variables. Variables are useful for all sorts of things. It's kind of like in math. It's represents a number, but in math, usually it represents an unknown number you're solving for. In programming, a variable is just a place to store a number. And it's probably not a number you are unaware of. You're not trying to solve for it. It's just a place to store information, really. And variables in Scratch don't have to store numbers. They can store words as well as numbers. They used to be able to store entire sprites, but that doesn't happen anymore. But that's okay. We can basically store whatever information that you can type can be stored inside of a variable. We're going to store mostly numbers today. And we're going to make it so that when you press the keys, this vehicle will kind of move around. I think in this video, we'll just do it so that we'll get the character or whatever it's going to be moving. And then in a second lesson, which we may or may not have time for, we'll do the actual collision so that you're bouncing off of the walls. So take a look at this. There's probably a number of ways to do the movement. So the way I'm going to show you is going to allow us to have sort of a bit of momentum to the vehicle, so that when you press a key, it'll sort of accelerate in a direction. And then when we let go of the key, it'll kind of glide to a halt. It won't immediately stop moving. It'll sort of slowly, maybe not slowly, but like decelerate itself until it comes to a halt. And the background's really going to be irrelevant. We're not going to interact with the background at all. So it could even just not even be there. But I'm too lazy to turn it off. And I kind of enjoy looking at it, scrolling on the so I'll leave it in there. So we're going to be starting off with a loop, and you're welcome to do this along with me, but because it's a YouTube video, like we probably won't stop if like any particular person gets stuck. You can always kind of rewatch the video. So also feel free just to watch and understand and ask questions, and then like do it afterwards. It's your choice on how you want to do it. But here we go. We're gonna get just a simple loop going on. I'll just start it when I press the green flag, but we'll probably have to switch that up if we want an intro screen in front of it. But it's good enough for now. And I'm gonna have a forever loop. And before I do the variables, I just want to set something up. I'm going to be changing x and changing y. So I'm going to put these together into a forever loop. So right now, this script basically does nothing. Well, when I say change x by and change y by, that's whatever number I type in there is going to be added to our current x and y coordinates. So if I was to type in a number here, for example, if I was to type in 1 in here, what would happen to my vehicle? Which direction would I move if I typed in a 1 for change x by 1? Yeah, move to the right, because that's how the x-axis works, right? You increase, you go to the right. So I'll type in a 1 here, and you can see it's moving that way. If I type in a -1 here, I start moving the other way. And if I wanted to go faster, I could type in, say, a -5, and then, whoa, I'm really moving. So the size of the number will dictate the speed, and positive or negative dictates am I going left or right. And same kind of idea with change y. If I want to go up, is it positive or negative to go up? What do you think? Positive, you got it. So if I put in a +2 here, for example, I'll go up. But I put in a -2, I'll go down. So that's great, but I don't want to have to what kind of video game do you have to type numbers into a box? Like that's nuts. So we're not going to pilot that way. So what I want to do is I want to hook up some kind of script that reads in like when I press the keys, and then I'd like it to control those numbers. So what we need is a variable. So a variable is the orange tab, and you might not have used it too much. I'll just click on it. There's this sort of default my variable that's inside of it, and then there's these various blocks of code which are lovely for doing different things. Basically, you have the power to set and change variables, which is exactly what you can do with y coordinates. You can set and change y coordinates, and x coordinates as well. There's also the ability to show and hide the variables, and you could also just click this check mark to show the variables. And we'll show the variables just to make sure we understand what's going on with them. And I'm going to make 2 variables. For now, I'm going to make them for all sprites. And I think that'll just be handy for preventing weird situations from happening down the line. So for this project, we'll probably make all of our variables for all sprites. But in the future, we'll probably change that up and experiment with why you might make variables for this sprite only. So I'm going to make this one. I'm thinking of having like 2 players eventually in this game. So I want to call this one player 1. So I'll call this one, I don't want to get too fancy with the words, but I don't want to make it too simple. So basically this is going to represent sort of your speed in a particular direction. So velocity x is I guess a good one. So sort of your velocity in the x direction or speed in the x direction. Not sure what's a good name for that, but we'll go with that. And this is going to be for player 1. But gosh, it's getting pretty long. So usually I shorten this to Vx to be like this is a velocity x, and then I'll call it a P1 Vx for player 1 velocity x. So I'll make that one. And then I'll also make one for player 1 Vy. P1 Vy, so that'll be velocity in the y direction. So now I have these 2 variables here, and you'll see that they're shown on the screen. They're these little orange things that will show their values. And you can turn those off by just checking the check marks, but right now I'm actually quite happy to leave them on there. And I'm going to take these little nuggets of the variables, I'm going to plunk them inside of the change x and change y. So I'll put the P1 Vx in change x and the P1 Vy in change y. So we're all set up, and now what we can do is we can make another script, or we can even build it into this script, change the values of those variables, and that will cause us to like move in different directions. So I think what I'll do is just to err on the side of keeping things fairly simple, I'll leave this script as it is, and I'll build a second forever loop for checking to see what keys I'm pressing. And then at the end, I'll kind of combine them together just to show that they could all go in one place. But I think it helps to keep things clear if I do it that way. So I'm actually going to duplicate this, not because I want 2 of them, but I'm going to gut all this stuff out of there. I just really wanted the forever loop and the green flag trigger. So I find that's an efficient way to program. Just like steal stuff from your other scripts and throw away what you don't want. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to check to see if I'm pressing the keys. So some of you will want to use WASD. Some of you want to use arrow keys. It's like somebody in this room is like, I'm going to use like IJKL or something like that. It's going to do something weird. So the keys you want to choose is entirely up to you. I'm going to do the arrow keys just because they're at the top and they're easier to find. So I'm going to use an if statement. And I'm going to look for a particular key is pressed. So that's under sensing. And you can see there's a sensor that's like this right here. When, or a key blank pressed. And that's a drop-down list, so you can choose the arrow keys or whatever you want. See why I chose arrow keys? They're right there. So convenient. So I'll grab the up arrow. And then watch this. I think everyone should program the lazy way. So instead of doing that again, I'll just duplicate this if statement. And I'll put it right underneath. And I'll do one for the down arrow. And then, oh, watch this. I'll duplicate both of them at the same time. Oh, yeah. And then this is getting a little bit big. It's hard to see. So now I have 4 of them. And I'll just change the last 2 to now be right and left. Or left and right sounds better. So I'll do it in that order. So there's all these little shortcuts you learn as a Scratch programmer. Zoom out a little bit more so you can see the whole thing. So these if statements will be constantly checking because of the forever loop. Hey, am I pressing these different keys? And so what happens when you press those keys? Well, you can change the value of the variables. So for example, I'll show you what you can, like the most basic way to do this is I could just set the values to the variables. So I could say, when I press the up key, I'll set Vy to 2. And I'll put, if I press the down key, I'll set Vy to -2. And I'll just drag my little sprite out here. Ugh. There we go. So that's all I got going on in my script right now. And you'll see that if I press the key, Oh, I'll just start it all over. Then I move up and down. So I press up and I go up. If I press down, I go down. And that's lovely. And you can do the sort of same thing for left and right. But you notice there's a bit of a problem. Like if I just press up, I continue moving up forever until I press down. Like it doesn't like do any kind of acceleration. It just immediately jumps in that direction. So that's kind of dull. So instead of doing set, what I like to do is use change instead. So set basically says whatever it was, forget it. You're now going to be this value. Discard your old value, and now you're 2. Or, forget what you used to be, now you're -2. Change is very much like change y or change x. It just adds or subtracts onto whatever it currently is. So I'm going to do change vy by, if I'm going up, like probably a small number would be wise. I'll put 0.5, and then I'll change vy by minus, clicking hard, minus 0.5. So it'll add a half as I hold down those keys. So I press the green flag. You can see I can accelerate and decelerate now. It's still, when I let go of the keys, it still unfortunately keeps on going. But now I can get this I can decelerate. And if I press up, it takes a while for me to actually slow down and start going in the other direction. Get some nice acceleration going on. You can do the same thing for the Vx and Vy, and then you can press in all directions and just zip all over the place. So I'll do the same thing for left and right. So for left, I'm going to subtract from Vx. And I think I'm zoomed in a bit, so I'll zoom out. So maybe minus 0.5. It's just a number I've chosen off the top of my head. If you find that's not responsive enough, or you want to make it slower, then you can adjust that number. For moving to the right, I'll change Vx by positive 0.5. So if I start that, you'll see that I can actually press keys in different combinations and get some pretty nice movement going on where I kind of accelerate in different directions. It still ignores the terrain, but that's okay. Now, if I let go of the keys, it just keeps going in that speed, sort of like if I was in outer space, right? And my spaceship's thrusters just turn off. You just keep drifting in that direction, and that might be a good mechanics for a game that you're creating. I don't know, if it's a spaceship game, if you're flying through the trenches of the Death Star or something in an X-wing, that might look pretty good. But it also makes it pretty hard. I don't know, I would find that pretty difficult to play that game. And since when does Star Wars care about physics anyways? There's sound in space. What's going on with that? Why do I hear X-wings going pew pew and stuff? That doesn't make sense. So I'm not too worried about realistic physics. I just want nice gameplay. So the one extra thing I'd like to add into this is this deceleration. So when I'm not pressing, well, actually, I'm just going to do it all the time, and you have to fight against it. But I'd like to have something that's going to slow you down. So what I'll do is, in addition to these if statements, I'm going to do one last thing, and that is I'm going to constantly be multiplying my speed by a fraction. What happens when you multiply something by a fraction? Does it get bigger or smaller? Assuming it's less than 1. Yeah, it gets smaller, right? So if I multiply it by even a fraction really close to 1, 95% or something, then it's gonna it'll take a little while, but that will kind of add up, and eventually it'll get to 0 speed. It'll get to some really weird speeds actually. You'll see multiplying by 0.95 or something will get these numbers into really weird scientific notation style numbers. But I think it's the best way to do it. So I'm going to take, at the very end of all my if statements in this forever loop, I'm gonna zoom in to make sure everyone can see this. I'm going to just set my px as a vx and vy to 95% of whatever it was. So to do that, all I do is I set this to, and you're going to need an operator. So we haven't used too many operators yet. I keep jiggling around here. I'm going to use the multiply operator. and multiply. Check it out. It's a star. And you might think, that's a strange choice, but it turns out in almost every programming language, multiplying is with the star because the x is already taken as a key, for either just using x to describe things or, like an x position or something. So almost every programming language in the universe, I guess on Earth, I assume those are the only programming languages. That's probably not statistically accurate, but is going to be a star. And so I'm just going to drop that into each one. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set Vx to be whatever Vx was. So I'll go grab from the variables the Vx nugget and times it by, you can try different values, but I'll put 0.95. I'll do the same thing for Vy. I'll just set Vy to be whatever it was. Oops, I knocked out my operator. To whatever it was times 0.95. And so if I'm not actively adding to it, it's going to multiply it by 0.95, and it'll just sort of accumulate this 95% over and over again, and will decelerate. So if you watch what happens, if I let go, I'll kind of glide to a halt.
Grade 9 students getting their immunization shots today with the last name M through R. Please go down to the lower cafeteria now. Thank you.
All right, have fun getting your shots. So this is like pretty low speed, so I could see even putting this at like 0.98 for more quicker deceleration. So if I let go, I guess I have to restart the script. So now it sort of decelerates. Even 0.99 maybe would be okay. You can see the numbers get pretty weird though as it's going down, we're getting into really tiny numbers and stuff, but that's okay, it's no big deal. So this way, you kind of will just naturally decelerate. Even maybe 0.99 might be all right, given our numbers here. Oh, actually, no, it's the other way around, isn't it? I want to make it like 0.9 would make it decelerate faster. The further away from 1 you are, the faster it'll decelerate. So I put 0.9. Now look how fast it decelerates. It's just like... And you'll see that you have to kind of fight harder against it. So you might need to change this 0.5 to something a little bit bigger in order to sort of counteract that. Yeah, Kieran, thanks for your question.
Why don't we put it in an else statement?
So that's an interesting idea. So that way you could sort of, when you're not pressing the keys, it's just that would make it a lot more complicated. So it works, like the actual difference between the gameplay will be negligible. Because you can always compensate by just having larger numbers here. But it's certainly a valid choice.
Well, if you want control. And then I guess the other question is why there's no max for the speed?
Yeah, well, we haven't done that yet. So we could do that if you want to. But always when I'm teaching a lesson, there's sort of a balance between what complexity do I want to show? Do I want to show the perfect way to do movement, which is more complex? Or do I want to show a simpler way that really works pretty much just as well, but there's some slight differences. So, I kind of err on one side or the other side, and sometimes I get it, the complexity right, and sometimes I get it wrong. But I would say this is probably fairly nice and simple for most people to follow. So what Kieran's mentioning is well, you could use else ifs, but then you have to make a chain of else ifs, and you have to make sure your next else if gets into the other else, and so on. And there's all these little complexities that will cause some challenges. Yeah, but then I want to have that kind of drift that's happening there. That's sort of the point of the exercise. So, but there's definitely ways of doing that too. Yeah, but I think this is a pretty good way of doing it. You're getting pretty responsive stuff. If you're finding you're not fast enough at this point, because multiplying by 0.9 is maybe holding you back, then you could change these numbers so that they're changing by 1 or 0.7 or something like that, and just kind of find a speed that's good for you. Last but not least, these don't really need to be separate scripts. They're just both forever loops doing things. So what I'm going to do is just going to merge them together. So I'm going to take these if statements, and I'm just going to stick them with that first script. But I did want to keep them separate just to point out that sort of this here is really what's moving you, and this script over here is just changing the variables. and the variables are affecting your position because of these two things right here, and then the keys are affecting the variables because of these things here, and then last but not least, we have our deceleration that's down here. And actually, you might even want to add some comments. I like this feature. You can right-click and add a comment. So I'm going to add a comment and just say like deceleration. This is like this decelerates you. Maybe I'll add a comment to these if statements to say these control direction. Or maybe I'll say change Vx and Vy variables. And then maybe over here, this one here, I'll make a comment to say that these are the scripts that actually control the position of your vehicle. And then when I put them all together, I still have those kind of reminders that are there. So if I zoom out, you can see those are, it's kind of a little bit messy, but I have those comments to remind me what's going on with the script. And that's basically how you're going to make a character movable inside of this environment, and it has some kind of natural drift to it and some nice maneuverability. That's a little bit challenging to move around, but not too frustrating. Or at least I don't think it's too frustrating. You can tell me if I'm wrong. As you play your game, you might get frustrated. So I'm going to stop the video there.